Hey there, if you've ever been the one who gave it all and somehow still ended up alone with yourself. If you've ever wondered, why is it that I loved with everything I had, but still wasn't the one they chose to stay? Or maybe you felt that standing alone is easier than holding on to something that's already lost its meaning. Then this story is for you, because today, we're not just talking about Aries. We're stepping into the quiet, unspoken journey of a soul that chose to step away from the world, not to escape, but to return. And that journey, it begins in a place many have touched, but few have truly faced, a place where each step may seem lost, but in truth it's simply finding its way back home. There are footsteps that seem lost in the noise of life, but in truth, they're quietly finding their way home. Some souls are born to burn bright in the darkness, but after too many long, cold winters, they learn to keep just a little bit of that fire for themselves. That's Aries, a warrior born under the first flame of the universe, always moving forward with a fearless heart and eyes that never back down. People often speak of Aries as a symbol of strength, of drive, of unstoppable courage, but few ever realize behind that shining armor is a soul that has bled quietly, endlessly, and sometimes without anyone noticing. Aries has loved with every breath in their chest, fought hard to hold onto someone they cared about, even battled against themselves just to make someone else happy. And in the midst of all that effort, they lost something deeply important, themselves. This world, it's never been kind to hearts that burn too brightly, because fire, when it burns too wild, often frightens those who have forgotten how to feel. And Aries, by nature a trailblazer, has thrown themselves into battles, only to be met with exhaustion, with misunderstanding, or worse, silence. But one day, when the fire in their heart stopped chasing the crowd, Aries came to a halt, not because they were broken, but because they finally understood. Not every journey requires company. Some roads are meant to be walked alone, and in that stillness, they found something the noise had always drowned out. A quiet answer they'd been seeking for years. Being alone was no longer something to fear. It became a choice, an awakening, a doorway leading back to themselves. And once Aries stepped through that door, they didn't just find peace, they found something they had forgotten, their own energy, their own light, and the quiet belief that they were enough. Maybe you're hearing this on a quiet morning, or maybe it's late at night when loneliness tends to knock. Either way, you need to know this. Choosing to be alone is not weakness. It's not giving up, it's knowing. You deserve something more, something deeper, something healthier and whole, and Aries knows that now. So today, we're walking alongside them, not into drama or heartbreak, but into a truth that's gentle, grounding, and real. Together, we'll open the door to 10 truths, 10 reasons why Aries chose to walk alone, and why that solitude became their greatest freedom. Maybe, somewhere in this story, you'll see yourself, or someone you love, because this journey isn't just about Aries. It's about anyone who's learning how to come home to themselves after years of chasing love in all the wrong places. And that journey, it begins with one simple lesson, a lesson anyone who's been hurt will understand. Not everyone who enters your life is meant to hold your light, and that's exactly why Aries learn to protect their energy like a treasure. Not everyone is wise enough to recognize. There's a truth most people don't want to say out loud, that in this life we don't just get tired from work or circumstances, we get tired from the people we love, from the relationships that slowly drain our light piece by piece. And Aries knows this better than anyone, because when they love, they give it all. When they trust, they dive in with no backup plan. And when they give, they don't hold anything back for themselves. That's why they've loved the wrong people in the wrong way at the wrong time, not because they were foolish, but because their heart was too sincere to know how to protect itself. They walked into relationships with the brightest flame and walked out with ashes, smoldering. Aries used to believe, if I try just a little harder, if I forgive one more time, maybe they'll love me the way I love them. But life answered them with silence. Love is never enough when only one person is carrying the weight of the boat. And the most painful part wasn't the breakup. It was the moment Aries realized they were slowly losing themselves for someone who never truly saw them. In the middle of those sleepless nights, they learned a lesson no book could teach. No one has the right to drain your light, not even the person you once loved with everything. They say, Even the smallest flame can light the way through darkness, but if you keep letting the wind rush in, that flame won't survive. Buddha once said, to guard your energy is to guard your life, to set boundaries is to love yourself like you'd love a child crying inside your chest. And Aries had to learn that the hard way. They learned how to stop before they burned out completely, learned how to say no even when their heart still wanted to say yes, learned how to close a door even when part of them waited for someone to come back through it. But most of all, they learned how to stand up, brush off the dust, and walk forward, not with bitterness, not with hate, but with clarity, because sometimes forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in. It means setting yourself free to walk on without carrying their damage with you. Aries no longer lives to please anyone. They live to protect the light that God and the universe placed inside them since the very beginning. That fire isn't meant to warm those who refuse to feel it. It's meant to shine, where love uplifts you, not exhaust you. And if you're hearing this, maybe you've been in a relationship that made you feel small. Maybe you gave so much that by the end of it, all you had left was silence. And if your heart has ever broken like that, then like Aries, you deserve to heal. Just remember, protecting your energy is not selfish. It's how you say to yourself, I am worth more than being worn out by what doesn't love me back. And sometimes, the moment you begin to draw that line, you'll feel God quietly opening a new door for you. A door with no waiting, no confusion, no one making you question your worth, just light. And a path wide and open for those who know how to love themselves. Like it's a miracle. Have you ever loved someone until you were completely empty, only to realize you had nothing left for yourself? If you have, I invite you to share your story below, because maybe, just maybe, your words will be the light for someone else, still lost in their own darkness. As for Aries, after learning to protect their energy like a flame in the middle of a storm, they began to see something even deeper. A truth not everyone is brave enough to live by. Freedom isn't just a state, it's a sacred breath. Once Aries learned how to protect their own light, they didn't just want to be loved anymore. They wanted to be free to be who they are. And that is when the story expands into something bigger, wider, quieter. A space where all the old chains, love, approval, expectations no longer weigh them down. They become just passing winds, because in the heart of Aries, there's something even more sacred than love itself. The right to live freely, unafraid, untamed, unbound. Some people were born to love, but Aries was born to live fully. And on the journey of learning to love life on their own terms, they discovered a priceless truth. No love is worth more than freedom. Freedom isn't rebellion. It's not a ticket to escape responsibility. To Aries, freedom is sacred space, a space the soul needs in order to simply be. No chains, no control, no asking permission, just to breathe. There was a time when Aries gave up that freedom just to hold onto a relationship. They stayed quiet when their truth deserved a voice. They softened their fire when they should have been allowed to be bold, honest, alive. They shrank themselves down just to fit into someone else's world. And little by little, they realized they were living in a cage, not because someone locked the door, but because they kept making themselves smaller, so no one would be uncomfortable. Have you ever been with someone and still felt trapped in an invisible cage? It's one of the worst feelings in the world. You're not alone, but you're not free. You're not tied down, but every choice must pass through someone else's emotions. Buddha once taught, impermanence is the nature of all things, and any attachment that isn't born from true love will eventually turn into suffering. Aries didn't just understand that with their mind, they lived it. They played the part, soft, agreeable, easy to love, while deep inside, the fire in their heart was begging to live. And then one morning, they looked in the mirror and couldn't find themselves anymore. Just a pair of tired eyes, a heavy shoulder, and a soul quietly waiting to be called home. That was the moment Aries let go, not of a person, but of the hope that someone else would ever truly understand their fire. They stopped living to be loved and started living to be free. Free to say what they believe, free to chase a dream without needing approval, free to not answer a text out of politeness, free to be silent, to be wild, to be radiant without anyone needing to say it's okay. And in that wide open space, Aries found a different kind of joy, a joy that didn't come from someone's presence, but from their own return. Freedom can't be bought, it can't be negotiated, and once it's lost, it's hard to get back. Aries knows that now deeply, so they choose solitude, not out of fear, not out of anger, but because in that space, they can breathe, they can live, they can be real, and you know something. When a person starts living true to who they are, God starts rearranging everything around them. Old relationships quietly fall away, new paths open without force, and the doors that stayed shut for years begin to open again gently and in light. Freedom is a gift God gave to every soul the day we were born. We just have to be brave enough to take it back whenever life tries to take it away. To Aries, freedom isn't just a choice, it's a belief, it's a way of life, it's the sacred space where their original divine design stays untouched. And if you're listening right now and you feel like you're living in an invisible cage, maybe ask yourself, what would happen if I no longer needed permission to be who I already am? And if that question makes you breathe easier, then maybe it's time to step out like Aries once did. And here's the strange part. When they walked out of that cage made of expectations, they found another door, quieter, softer. It didn't lead to the world. It led inward, to a place where no one controlled them anymore, but no one clapped either. Just the sound of their own heartbeat, and a vast, still space, where every storm was already at peace. And in that sacred silence, Aries learned something they never knew before. True strength isn't found in shouting to the crowd. It's found in standing quietly with no one around and still feeling whole. There are moments when there's nothing left outside to listen to. Every sound fades into the background. Every word, every argument, every need to prove something just feels heavy. And in that silence, there's only one person left. You. For Aries, that used to be the greatest fear, the silence. The moment they had to face themselves with no one else to echo back. The fear that no one needed them, that no one was listening, that no one would ever say, I understand you. But like every soul on its way home, Aries reached a point where there were no more choices, no one left to blame, no one left to cling to. Only one quiet question remained, as deep and endless as the ocean. Who am I, when there's no one left to call my name? At first the silence felt like a prison. Their minds screamed into the stillness. Old memories came flooding back. Hurtful words replayed like broken records. They thought maybe loneliness would break their heart, but it didn't. It only peeled away the armor they'd been wearing, and underneath it all was the softest part, but also the realest part. And then day by day, the silence stopped being scary. It became a friend, a sacred space where they didn't have to perform, didn't have to pretend to be okay. They just had to be. Buddha once said, if you sit still long enough, even muddy water will clear itself. And Aries sat under the nights with no lights on, in the rooms no one knew, with a heart still cracked in places. And strangely, the moment they stopped running from themselves, they heard something small, a whisper but as clear as truth itself. You are not alone. God doesn't always speak in thunder. He doesn't always show up in miracles. Sometimes he just sits beside you when no one else does. And in that stillness, Aries began to hear a deeper voice within. Not the voice of pain or anger or unmet expectations, but the original voice, the one from the soul quietly longing for peace. What would happen if you sat still long enough to hear the real voice of your own heart? Maybe you'd cry, maybe you'd tremble, maybe you'd realize how long you've been running from yourself. But after that, you'd feel light, so light you wouldn't need to go anywhere else just to be heard, because finally you'd become the first one to listen. To you, for Aries, the silence stopped being a punishment. It became an invitation, a whisper from the divine, to come home, not back to the past, but home within. And when you go deep enough, you'll realize something. Loneliness doesn't kill anyone. It just strips away everything fake, so what remains is the truest, strongest, and purest part of you. Loneliness, when held in light, becomes a mirror, and that mirror won't judge you. It'll simply show you how far you've drifted from yourself, and just how possible it still is to come back. Aries learned that, and once they made peace with the silence, they could finally hear something they'd avoided for so long. Love, not love that comes from someone else, but the love they once begged for from the world, while forgetting to give it to themselves. There's something very quiet that happens. After you've touched the bottom of silence, you start craving love in a different way. No noise, no ownership, no transaction, just love. That's real and whole. There were days when Aries lived just to be loved, just to have someone look their way, just to see a simple message light up their phone, so they could feel like they mattered again. With a heart full of fire and sincerity, Aries gave up their pride more times than they could count, just to hold onto a love that never felt clear. They texted first, they called first, they stayed quiet first, they forgave first. They were always the one walking towards someone, even when no one walked toward them. Have you ever waited for a message from someone, only to realize you've forgotten how to send love to yourself? Aries was there, stuck in that waiting room, where the heart sits beside a closed window, hoping that if they wait long enough, someone will knock. But love, when you have to wait too long, stops being love. It turns into attachment. Worse, it becomes a rejection of yourself. Aries learned that the hard way, after giving too much and getting only silence, distance, or half-hearted affection in return. Real love shouldn't have to be begged for. You shouldn't have to shrink yourself just to be seen. You shouldn't have to force a bond with someone who's already halfway out the door. That's a big lesson. One Aries had to cry through, break into pieces to finally understand. If you don't hold yourself, the world won't stop to hold you either. Buddha said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the universe, deserve your own love and compassion." And on an ordinary night, just like any other, Aries did something extraordinary. They came home, back to themselves. Not to isolate, but to love. They finally touched their wounds without turning away. They whispered kindness instead of self-blame. They gave themselves the quiet, gentle space they had always wished someone else would offer. Loving yourself isn't a trend, it's a rescue mission. It's the start of a deeper, truer kind of love. From being someone who constantly asked for love, Aries became someone who created it. From within, from the small things like sleeping enough, eating on time, not forcing a smile when tired, not holding onto toxic ties just to avoid being alone. And you know what? When Aries began loving themselves, as if they were the most important person in their life, the world began to reflect that back. Lighter connections, more honest conversations, people who saw their light, not because Aries was trying to shine, but because they just were. Aries didn't have to wait anymore, didn't have to beg to be chosen, because they had already chosen themselves. And the beautiful thing is, God never left them. He was just waiting for them to return. And when Aries filled their own cup, they could finally love others, not out of need, not for approval, not in exchange for anything, but simply to share. Because real love always starts from within. You can't pour from an empty cup. You can't heal someone if touching them keeps reopening your own wounds. For Aries, learning to love themselves was the bravest thing they've ever done, because it meant letting go of the image of always being strong, always being in control, always knowing how to rise. It asked for softness and sometimes faith that loving yourself enough means you'll never have to search for love in places it doesn't exist. And then one day, on a breeze-soaked afternoon, when all expectations had finally fallen away, Aries realized what they once thought was the end was actually a door into a new space, quiet, unhurried, free of chasing. A space where old wounds turned into light, and the very things that once broke them became the foundation for a stronger self. And in that sacred space, something surprising happened. Aries didn't just heal, they evolved, not to become better for someone else, but to return whole and peaceful to themselves. Something quiet but deeply powerful has shifted inside Aries after the heartbreaks, after the long nights spent sitting with themselves, after staring into the mirror and no longer recognizing the fire that once lit up their eyes. Aries began to understand life isn't meant to be lived just to please everyone, and love doesn't mean giving so much that you forget who you are. There comes a strange phase in life when shallow conversations no longer excite you, when you start pulling back not because you're afraid, but because you're learning to tell the difference between noise and the true calling of your soul. For Aries, alone is no longer an empty space. It's become a sacred stillness, a place to reset, to reflect on old relationships, and to answer one very honest question: who truly lifts me up and who's only here to drain my light? That time alone became a laboratory of the heart, where every past experience was laid out on the table, not to blame, but to understand. They started learning how to see people, not just by what they said, but by what they did. When they thought no one was watching, they learned to feel the energy of a connection, not just listen to excuses. Buddha said, "Knowing what is enough is happiness." Letting go is freedom. There was a time Aries held onto relationships just because they were afraid to lose them, but now they know not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay, and that is a blessing in disguise, because if everyone stayed, there'd be no room for the ones who truly deserve to be there. So Aries learned to choose more carefully, not out of coldness, but out of growth, not because they lost faith in people, but because they finally started trusting themselves. They believe now they are worthy of healthy love, love that doesn't control, doesn't manipulate, doesn't make you feel like you have to perform just to be kept. Aries doesn't need a crowd anymore. They just need a few people, genuine, grounded, people who honor each other's space and limits. And the strange thing is, the moment Aries started setting boundaries, the world responded. Those who came close no longer did so for gain, but for connection. Half-hearted relationships fell away on their own like leaves dropping in autumn. No bitterness, no holding on, because Aries finally understood. Letting go of the wrong people at the right time is also an act of love. And in that process, something else magical happened. They didn't just filter others. They started filtering themselves. Old habits, old thoughts, old reactions that used to lead to pain, now they face them with softer eyes. Not to erase the past, but to transform it from victim to observer, from reaction to understanding, from unconscious to intentional, from chaos to clarity. That's inner evolution, quiet, humble, and honest. Just a little more stillness each day, a little more truth, a little more self-awareness, and somewhere in that maturity, Aries found freedom. Not freedom because no one's holding them back, but freedom from the fear of losing someone. Aries has reached a chapter in life where if you stay, stay because you want to, not because they beg you to, and if you leave, go in peace. They won't chase. They no longer need to prove themselves. No need to explain why they deserve love, care, or loyalty, because they know now, those who truly see them will stay. And those who come only to shine for a moment before disappearing, their exit is a blessing too. That's no longer sadness, that's liberation. And when the heart is finally still, Aries realizes what they once thought was a loss was actually making space for something more sacred, more lasting, more free. It's a simple truth, but one that takes a lifetime to learn. Happiness doesn't come from who walks into your life. It comes from who you choose to let stay. And in that light Hazair moment, Aries saw it clearer than ever. Happiness was never out there. It was always born from the freedom within, the moment you remember you are worthy. There are moments in life when you stop, not because you're tired, but because you realize you've gone too far from yourself. For Aries, that moment didn't come with a thunderclap. It wasn't some dramatic crisis. It came quietly, like an exhale at the end of the day, like a question whispered into the stillness of the night. If no one else is here, do I still exist? That's when Aries began to understand. Happiness isn't in a text from someone you miss. It's not in someone's gaze. It's not in being wanted, chosen, or needed. True happiness is in having the courage to sit with yourself and say, I'm not perfect, but I still deserve peace. Buddha once said, all peace begins within. When your mind is still, the world around you softens too. When you stop chasing, you realize what you've always been searching for was right here within you all along. Aries once gave others the power to shape their emotions. They felt joy when loved, sadness when abandoned, restless when ignored. They let happiness become a product of circumstances. But life taught them something important. Anything that can be taken away can never be the source of true peace. So Aries began returning inward, not to fill the void, but to embrace it as part of who they are. They stopped forcing themselves to be happy all the time. They learned to sit quietly with sadness and watch it pass like a drifting cloud. Aries started listening to themselves, to each breath, to each thought, to the little things, choosing a meal they love, wearing clothes that feel good, walking at their own pace, slow but real. And on that path, they discovered something priceless. Happiness is a choice, not a reward. It's choosing to be with yourself, even when no one else does. It's choosing to believe in your own light, even when the world turns away. Aries took back the steering wheel of their life. They stopped blaming, stopped waiting, stopped hoping someone else would come and complete them, because they were already whole. They just hadn't allowed themselves to see it. And you know what? When Aries stopped searching out there, they began to see the universe inside themselves, full of color, full of motion, full of life. They realized They didn't need someone to knock on the door to feel alive. As long as they could breathe, they could love, they could choose, they could begin again at any moment. Self-born happiness doesn't come from something grand. It comes from knowing you no longer let pain define your worth. You no longer let memories dictate your future. You no longer let others decide if you're worthy of love. You are already enough, even if no one tells you that. You already have it all when you learn to come home to yourself, when you stop searching outside. You'll see you've always had enough. Enough love, enough light, enough strength to keep going, with a peace so deep. It doesn't depend on anyone. Thank you for walking this journey with Aries. A journey not just for a zodiac sign, but for anyone who's ever broken, awakened, and chosen to move forward with a more whole heart. May you always find peace and freedom right here within your own heart until we meet again on a higher plane of light.